On August 9, 1995, Jerry Garcia died in a rehab center. He was 53. His arteries were 85% blocked. His body was shutting down. But here's the part nobody talks about. 30 days before his death, he stood on stage at Soldier Field in Chicago and performed a song that sounded like a confession. His voice broke on the final words. People in the crowd said he looked like a ghost. He wasn't just singing that night, he was saying something. And when you hear what came out of his mouth in those last moments, it changes everything. The roots of a haunted man. Jerry Garcia came into the world in San Francisco's Excelsior district, a place full of noise, movement, and rough edges. Cars passed outside, people argued in the streets, and bars stayed loud late into the night. Yet inside his home, there was something even louder than the city. There was ambition, disappointment, and above all, music. His father, Joe Garcia, had come from Galicia in Spain as a teenager. He trained seriously as a clarinetist and believed talent could build a life. But a dispute with the musicians' union pushed him out of that world. To survive, Joe took over a downtown bar. Even so, he never fully let go of music. That dream stayed alive in the house, bruised but breathing. Maybe that is why he named his son Jerome after Jerome Kern, the great Broadway composer. It was not just a name, it was a wish. So Jerry did not grow up seeing music as a cute hobby. In his home, music was beauty, but it was also loss. It could lift a person and it could fail them. That contradiction sank deep into Jerry before he was even old enough to explain it. Then, when Jerry was only 4, life turned brutal. The family was up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and little Jerry was helping chop wood. He was told to hold the wood steady while his older brother swung the axe. One terrible swing later, 2/3 of Jerry's right middle finger were gone. There was blood, panic, screaming. Later, while sitting in the bath, he looked down and finally understood the finger was not coming back. Less than a year later, worse came. The family went on a fishing trip near the Trinity River. Jerry watched his father step into the cold river to fly fish, slip on a hidden rock, and vanish into the current. The water was deep and fast, and before anyone could reach him, he was gone. Jerry was only 5. That image stayed with him. His father was there, then suddenly he was not. After Joe's death, Jerry's mother had to take over the family bar. The weight became too much. Jerry and his brother were sent to live with their grandparents. In one move, Jerry lost not only his father, but also the last steady center in his daily life. He was now a boy with a missing finger, a dead father, and no real sense of belonging. The crash that changed everything. By high school, Jerry was pushing against everything. He skipped classes, got into fights, and was suspended more than once. His mother moved the family to Sonoma County, hoping quiet woods might settle him down. But the fire did not leave. He stole cars. He ignored rules. Then, at 17, he convinced his desperate mother to sign papers so he could join the army. The whole thing collapsed almost immediately. Military life demanded obedience and submission to authority. Jerry had no patience for any of that. By October 1960, just 9 months after entering, the army gave up on him. Then came the crash. On February 20th, 1961, Jerry was riding with friends near Palo Alto. The car was moving at 90 miles per hour when it hit a curve. The driver lost control. The car flipped over and over. Jerry went through the windshield and landed in a field, torn out of his shoes. Around him, the damage was everywhere. But the worst part was this: their friend Paul Spiegel never made it out. Jerry later called it his slingshot, a violent moment that snapped his life in a new direction. Guitar no longer felt like one option among many. It became urgent, necessary. He once said that day was when his life began. Death had come close enough to touch, and once it did, half measures no longer made sense. The birth of the dead. By 1965, Jerry and his band, then called The War, locks were grinding through miserable gigs in rough bars. But while they were scraping by, something strange was building in Northern California. Ken Kesey invited the band to his place in La Honda. That invitation led to the first acid test. Kool-Aid was laced. Films were projected onto walls. Nothing was stable, and right in the middle of that chaos, the Warlocks plugged in and played. In that moment, the band stopped being just another struggling act. They became part of a new world being born. They needed a new name. During a strange night at Phil Lesh's house, Jerry opened a dictionary and landed on the words, Grateful Dead. The phrase came from old folk stories about a traveler who buries a dead stranger and is later repaid by that spirit. It was eerie, old, mythic, and somehow perfect. The band had found itself. From their formation in 1965 until Jerry's death in 1995, the Grateful Dead played 2,314 official live shows. They turned concerts into rituals where songs stretched, changed, collapsed, and became something new each night. The band did something most others would never dare. They let fans record the shows. That decision built a vast underground network of tape exchanges that made every fan feel part of something larger. The Hidden War. By the early 1980s, Jerry Garcia was living inside a secret that was eating him alive. His heroin habit had grown into a $700 a day problem. Yet this was also the period when he gave some of the most spellbinding performances of his life. On stage, the guitar still melted in his hands. Behind that familiar smile was a man trapped between brilliance and breakdown. On January 5, 1985, his bandmates came to his home and forced the moment he had spent years avoiding. They gave him a brutal choice, the band or the drugs. Garcia agreed to go to rehab, but just 2 weeks later, he was found nodding off in his car in Golden Gate Park, drug paraphernalia around him. Instead of quietly entering rehab, he ended up in front of a judge. Still, 1985 was not a lost year. For a while, Garcia really did fight. Under the care of his housekeeper, he managed stretches of sobriety. But fame never loosened its grip. The pressure returned. The coma. Then came July 10, 1986. At his home in Northern California, Garcia suddenly collapsed. His blood sugar was catastrophically high. Before paramedics could stabilize him, he slipped into a diabetic coma. The next 5 days were a nightmare. His kidneys failed. His fever climbed to 105 degrees. At one point, his heart stopped, and doctors had to shock him back. When he finally woke up, the relief was enormous. But that relief lasted only until he reached for a guitar. His fingers would not do what they had done for decades. The coma had damaged the neural pathways tied to motor memory. He had to start again, not as a legend, but as a beginner. He relearned scales, chords, finger placement, even the basic feel of holding a pick. On December 15, 1986, 5 months after the coma, he walked onto the stage in Oakland. When he played those first notes, it felt like a return from the edge of death. Something in him had changed. From 1987 onward, his performing carried a different kind of depth, more fragility, but also more wisdom. The final decline. Yet survival did not mean safety. By 1993 and 1994, Garcia's body was breaking down fast. He slipped back into heavy narcotics to cope with constant pain. He gained a great deal of weight. Type 2 diabetes drained his energy. Sleep apnea stole rest from his nights. His arteries were eventually found to be 85% blocked. At just 53, the man whose fingers once moved with astonishing grace was struggling on stage, missing notes, his voice thinning and cracking. In July 1995, Garcia entered rehab, first at the Betty Ford Center, then transferring to Serenity Knolls in Forest Knolls, California. It looked like a real attempt to turn around, but by then, the damage inside him was far beyond what determination alone could fix. On August 9, 1995, staff at Serenity Knolls found Jerry Garcia dead in bed. It was not the overdose many assumed. It was the collapse of a body ravaged by diabetes, obesity, blocked arteries, sleep apnea, smoking, and long years of drug abuse. His heart simply gave out. He died while trying to recover. The ghost at Soldier Field. Just 30 days before his death, on July 9, 1995, at Soldier Field in Chicago, Garcia stepped on stage looking frail but determined. The Grateful Dead opened with Touch of Grey, and more than 55,000 fans sang along to a chorus about survival, not knowing they were watching his last concert. Midway through the second set came So Many Roads. That performance would become almost legendary in hindsight. Fans later said he looked ghostly in the spotlight, fragile yet glowing. His voice cracked on key lines. The song no longer sounded like performance alone. It sounded like confession. What he left behind. When Garcia died, the Grateful Dead as it had existed with him was over for good. He left behind an estate estimated at around $15 million. But his will was thin and badly prepared. What followed was years of legal warfare. Claims reportedly climbed past $50 million. Ex-wives, children, old friends, and business associates all came forward. One of the most painful cases involved Carolyn Mountain Girl Adams, who argued that Garcia had promised her $250,000 a year for 20 years. Private love letters he had written to her were read aloud in court. Yet, even in the shadow of all that, his final performances took on deeper meaning. This year, as the 30th anniversary of his passing approaches, fans are revisiting those last shows with fresh eyes. Vintage recordings have been remastered. Lost tapes have surfaced. And each one carries the same haunting quality, a man staring into the abyss, still playing, still reaching for something just beyond his grasp. What Jerry Garcia left behind in his final recording session wasn't just music. It was a message, a confession, a warning. And when you listen closely, when you hear his voice break on those last words, you realize he knew exactly what was coming. He played anyway. That is what gives you the chills. Subscribe to keep uncovering the truth behind the legends. Thanks for watching.